tension is palpable. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Dunelm Students' Union Question Time. You join us in the palatial surroundings of the Margot Fontaine Ballroom of Dunelm House. My name is Archie Dallas, and I'm the Duck Officer for Dunelm Students' Union, and I'll be acting as David Dimbleby for the evening. And I'm sorry, at this point I'm going to have to break the news. It's not actually going to be David Dimbleby here. So apologies to the reporter from Durham One, who I believe turned up for an exclusive interview. But afterwards, I'm more than happy to pretend if that would make a good story for you. So before we begin, I'd like to introduce our panel team. If I can see where they're all sitting. So, over on the far side, we've got Professor Anthony Forster, who's the Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Durham University. Next to him is Michael King, BA Hons Dunelm, who is the President of Durham Students' Union. Sitting in the centre, we have Usman Ali, who is the Vice President of Higher Education for the National Union of Students. Sitting just next to Professor Higgins is Professor Scott Parker, also BA Hons Dunelm, who's the Education and Welfare Officer from Durham Students' Union. And sitting closest to me, as I'm sure you all recognise, is Professor Christopher Higgins, who is the Vice-Chancellor and Warden of Durham University.
And also BSc Hons Dunelm.
BSc Hons Dunelm. I'm sure many other things. So, basically the format of the evening is going to work in a reasonably sort of casual way. We've got a series of questions. We've got ones that you've already submitted from the floor. We've had some that have been submitted beforehand, just in case no one turned up. And also, if everyone has any questions throughout the evening that they want to ask, what I would ask if Sally and Maddie can stand up. They're the two midgets at the back. They'll be running around with blank papers. If you want a question, if you could just sort of stick your hand up, beckon them over, and they'll fill out a question and then bring it up to me, and then we'll, what I'll do is I'll ask you to read your question, stand up and read your question in a loud, clear, concise voice. Good. Does everyone understand? Excellent. Right, with no further ado then, I think we'll probably start with a nice easy question to get us warmed up. And this question comes from Laura Dove from Collingwood College, which is, did the recent government white paper really have students at the heart of the system? Okay, so with that nice easy one to start us off, I'd like to go to, start with Scott.
Thanks, Archie. Well, the white paper had an overarching emphasis on quality, and student experience ultimately was the main focus of the white paper. The danger with the paper is that students will perceive that they should get more, which rolls into this argument of students becoming consumers. I think it's a rather dangerous ground to be getting in, that we see students as consumers. Ultimately, students should have this understanding that they should get more, but when we say get more, I think that should be through quality enhancement, through engagement and input in curriculum design, in academic representation, all of these areas, rather than being the consumers, they will get more for their money. This value for money argument is we should be very careful of this term, value for money. For me, the fundamental disappointment of the paper was the failure to recognise postgraduates. But I think my main emphasis is that it is about student engagement, it is about quality, and I think that's what we should remember from the paper.
Thank you. Professor Forster.
Thanks. I think I'd agree with Scott, in particular around this idea that students as consumer, and I don't think it serves the interests of students, because I think students ultimately will be shortchanged by conceptualising the relationship they have with universities, especially a university like this, Durham, as one based on a customer relationship rather than one based on partnership and students being part of a community of academic practice. And that's just left me on thinking one further thought, which is the white paper talks about students at the heart of the system, but I'm left wondering which students at the heart of the system. Because the sort of students that come to Durham want to come to a university that is as free as possible from government intervention, that doesn't have the heavy hand of bureaucracy weighing down on learning and teaching in the university. And actually I don't see any of that in the white paper. Actually I see a very sort of bureaucratic approach to higher education, and not one that is particularly liberating for a university like this, although it might well be something that is attractive to other universities, and that's something I absolutely do accept.
Well, I think it's probably about time we went to Usman. What are your thoughts on this?
In terms of putting students at the heart of the system, it's far from it. It's not putting students at the heart of the system. The only good thing to come out of the white paper is the fact that it recognises student unions as an institution and praises student unions for the work that it does. But apart from that, in terms of the knock-on effects, what's in the white paper is quite detrimental. The panelists have touched on students as consumers, and the white paper focuses on this quite a lot. And meeting David Willits and having a conversation with David Willits, he's quite keen on seeing students as consumers. And for me, this is detrimental for students. And even if they see themselves as consumer, this is quite a bad thing, because the knock-on effect of when you see yourself as a consumer is very individual-based rather than students as a whole. And we've seen in the USA this becoming what's actually happened. So in the USA, what they've actually done is that they listened to students as consumers, giving them what they wanted, but then the knock-on effect, they weren't spending that money on the quality of education that they were receiving or the academic experience that they were receiving. And I've been quite clear with officers is that we can't let this happen. We've got to make sure that the focus has to be on the quality of the education that the students are receiving, because ultimately this is why they're going to university. On top of that, it's working on a model that pushes fees to £9,000. You have this thing called the quorum margin in terms of trying to get students in with AABs and pushing on this. And what it's creating in terms of universities is this two-tier divide going forward, where the rich will get richer but the poor institutions will get poorer, and creating this even bigger, I'd say, class system of institutions going forward. And that's ultimately will have a big knock-on effect on students, especially from the poorest backgrounds.
Fantastic. I never thought I had to say this given our present company, but can I remind the panellists that you may chip in at any stage if you have a strongly held opinion. But yeah, just if you feel you have the urge to speak, then just let me know. And with that in mind, sort of a follow-up question. What changes can students expect to see next year with the introduction of £9,000 tuition fees? Professor Higgins.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment on the last question first. I pretty much agree with Scott and Anthony. There's two ways of answering the question. The first is students weren't at the heart of the white paper. Political compromise was. That's what it really was. And there's no clear vision that comes out of the white paper in any direction, whatever your political view is. It was a political compromise. The government say they put students at the heart of the white paper, but I think what they haven't thought through is the fact that students are different. If you've got 40% of 18-year-olds plus mature students, etc., going to university, there's a great diversity of need, motivation, ability, etc. And different students, frankly, need different types of education, which can be delivered by different types of university. And that wasn't really considered. It's sort of one size fits all. And I don't think that's appropriate either for universities or for the student body or potential student body. So I think that would be my comment. Your question was what changes can we see for the £9,000 fees? Well, first of all, that assumes you're at a university that is going to be charging £9,000, which we are at Durham, but of course many universities are unlikely to be. In fact, I think 29 universities have recently gone back to offer and said we want to reduce the fees we're charging. For a variety of different reasons. Probably because they think they won't be able to recruit the students they would like to recruit at the fees they were charging. But there's, I think, two important points to make. First of all, we as a university might get £9,000 per student, but that's not much more than we get per student now. So people think we've got 3 times as much money because the students are paying 3 times as much fees. That simply isn't the case. The money that comes in from the students is simply replacing money that's been taken away from the government. And by 2014-15, 1% of this university's income will actually come directly for teaching, will come from the government. All the rest will be from student fees. And so students expecting 3 times as much because they think they're paying 3 times more is not the case, because we as a university don't have 3 times more money. That's the first point I wanted to make. Nevertheless, of course, students, rightly, should always expect universities to provide them with value for money. And we need to work with all our students to provide value for money for the sorts of students that come to Durham University, which are different from the sorts of students that go to other universities, going back to my earlier point. The other thing we just need to think about is the point that Anthony and Scott both made, is that students are not buying, in a sense, as a consumer going to Tesco. What the fee is doing, whether you like it or not, is in a sense giving access to a university community. And trying to nail down exactly what that buys you, because different students get different things out of their university community. Some get more out of societies, some get more out of colleges, some get more out of the student union, some get more out of the library, some get more out of laboratories, and of course different students get different things out of the university. And so essentially what students are buying when they come to Durham is they're becoming part of that community, and then they can get out of that community whatever they want and whatever suits them. And we've got to help them do that. That's our job. But trying to nail it down in exactly which bits we pay for, which bits we don't pay for, doesn't really help. And that's particularly true for a university like Durham, where we're not a vocational university. We're educating students for, hopefully, the best jobs in the world that they can get, whatever excites them. And if you look at the employability figures overall, we've got really successful alumni in whatever fields you want, be it in business or charity work or social work or whatever you like, really successful. And it doesn't matter what department they come from. We've got social workers, leading social workers, people who've made a difference socially who come from physics or classics or whatever, and the same with people leading in business and so on. So it's getting a good Durham, a good degree, and all that goes with it, that's the value, not necessarily the specific subject you study. And I think so looking at it holistically is the way to look at it, at least at a university like Durham. And I say other universities are very different. They may be more vocational or whatever, and other universities may have a different view, but that's certainly the view I would express from a Durham perspective.
Fantastic. I see Mike has been scribbling away. So Mike, sort of the same question to you, any response you might have to the VC's question. What changes do you expect to see, or as a student union, what changes do we expect perhaps from a £9,000 tuition fees?
Firstly, in response to Chris, yes, students will be demanding value for money, and yes, our employability is fantastic, but there are many areas of Durham University experience that isn't where it should be. We are the most expensive institution in the northeast of England, and I think that we need to remember that students will be coming here with a very high expectation. They'll have a demand for the best possible university experience they can get. On the white paper was a lose-lose for everybody. The government lost, academics lost, students definitely lost. Postgrads weren't even mentioned. And so, but on the £9,000, what can students expect? Well, they can expect a better quality education. They will demand a better quality education. There won't be more money for the university to ensure this, but students will be coming with much higher expectations, and we need to be aware of this. How can we make sure that they get the best possible experience? I think it's remembering that the university and the students are not a separate body, but they are the same thing. That the university shouldn't be making decisions that don't involve students. The students are paying for every single penny of their education. All the money that the university is getting is coming from students' pockets. And so they will demand value for money, and students in return should be involved in as much of the consultation process as possible, as much of the decision-making process as possible. Because yes, I don't like the word consumer, I don't think anybody likes the word consumer. We are a partner with the university, but at the end of the day we are still paying copious amounts of money, and if we're not getting exactly what we expect when we arrive through the front doors, then we should be asking the university why this is. So I think the solution will be for us to become a partner and make sure that we are as involved in every single decision that the university makes as students.
Can I just direct a question at Professor Forster? As having responsibility for education in the university, Professor Forster, do you foresee that the university will take a lead in increasing, putting more emphasis on teaching? We are a research-led institution, but for many undergraduate students, as a student union, we hear many kind of complaints and many dissatisfied students with certain teaching in certain areas. And I think this is an area with increased tuition fees that students really have a right to demand more on, and that is this teaching element rather than just being a research-led institution.
That's a tough question. The naughty part of me wants to say that the £9,000 fee will have absolutely no impact at all on the importance of teaching in the university, because historically Durham has a really strong commitment to education, to learning and teaching. When I just made a few notes myself as to what are the changes that are going on, and I was trying to ask myself how many of these are directly linked to the £9,000 fees. We've completely reviewed the induction arrangements, so that we're now going to have a week-long induction at the start of the academic year, with the corollary of that terms are always going to start on a Monday now. We've spent the last year and a half looking at the impact of research on teaching to make sure that every single one of our programs has a very clear explanation as to why the research that's going on in the particular department or the particular school has a direct and material impact on the quality of teaching in the department. We've had a focus on employability for 3 years now, and in all of those key areas of learning and teaching, I'm not sure actually the £9,000 fee has made much difference to it. I think what has made a difference, if I might say this, is actually the quality of student representation. It's actually working really closely in partnership with the Students' Union, asking through them what matters to students, and then taking issues really very seriously. So actually in response to that question, rather than the £9,000 fee question, we've looked again at feedback and assessment, and you and I know we've got a lot more work to do there, but that's been really important in thinking through how we handle that set of issues. Each of the faculties looking at how they respond very directly and pass back information to students on the NSS performance, which is absolutely crucial to the university's reputation, and DSU again have been really important in that. And so I'm just left wondering, so what actually has the £9,000 fee actually changed? And I think what I would point to is that in thinking about the cost that students will bear from next year, one of the things that we've been trying to do through Graham Town, the Deputy Warden's office, is try and work out how much of the costs we can absorb into the £9,000 fee and how much cost would lie outside of the £9,000 fee, and students would pay directly depending on what particular type of service that they would like to use. And that actually has been quite a complicated thing, because it's highlighted in the university a very wide range of ways in which individual colleges respond to individual charges on students.
I suppose that just looking down my list here, and I suspect that we'll be straying into territory we'll cover later, and I can see the Vice-Chancellor champing at the bit, but we're going to Usman Ali first, please.
From my point of view, students certainly should be paying more for less or more for the same. There's no doubt in my mind that expectations are going to rise, and we've got to equip ourselves as an institution in terms of the expectations, but not just expectations on the academic experience of the university, but expectations on the student experience as well. Our number, question 23, which is going to come into the NSS, is has the Students' Union made a positive impact in my lives, shows that students are now wanting information based on the student experience overall as well, and not just the institution, and there needs to be a better support package from my point of view, and more help in terms of working with the Students' Union going forward to make sure that these expectations are going to be fulfilled for students coming into campus. But on top of that, there'll be issues like students should not have to wait now for feedback on their work in the second semester when they've done the assignment in the first week of the first semester. The feedback should be clear, it should be concise so they understand it, so it actually helps that student as well. Hidden course costs, there should be no hidden course costs. If a student is paying £9,000, they should not be paying additional fees on top of the £9,000, and they should be taken out and actually made available to students so they know the hidden costs to the student before they're even on the course. On top of that, if it was up to me, and something that I will be pushing on, institutions should be making public where the expenditure has gone, because now, let's face it, it's the expenditure of the students that they're spending.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Chris Higgins.
A number of points. First of all, institutions legally have to say where their expenditure goes, so it's all in the public domain. Secondly, I absolutely agree with Mike that the key thing that I think the £9,000 fees will do is it won't give the universities more money, but it will focus our minds on partnering with the student union and vice versa on how we can best understand what students need and want and how we can best deliver that, given the limitation on the money. The third thing, you mentioned course costs, Anthony mentioned that too. We have, for example, next year incorporated field trip courses into the £9,000 paid fees rather than put them on top, for example, to minimise the burden on students. And we listened to the students last year, I know it wasn't you, who said two things to us through the student union. One thing they said to us is they wanted as many course costs as possible incorporated into the, because then there's a loan against it, and that means students, particularly from those from less well-off backgrounds, can get a loan, whereas they had to pay it up front. That would be difficult. They said the same thing about the access agreement, that as a university, they would much rather we didn't reduce our fees, because students get a loan against that, but we put a lot of bursary money, the loan agreement money, into bursaries, so that students then had money to help them their accommodation or whatever else it is that's also required to come to Durham. And that's what we did, which is actually against the trend of most universities, but that's what our students asked. And that's what we've done for the students from less, so the students from less well-off backgrounds can get bursaries. And we put a high proportion of our offer money into that. And the final point I just want to make is about the research links. The salaries of the staff here are made up of two components. People don't always realise that. There's money that comes in for their teaching and money that comes in for their research. And actually, that is split roughly in the proportion to the time that staff teach and research. So if we didn't have any research income, we wouldn't be doing any research, but we'd also have roughly half the numbers of staff. So the fact people are doing research doesn't take them away from doing teaching. The money for the research comes in from different sources, be it from government sources, research councils, industry, or whatever. What that means actually for you, as students here at Durham, is that, as Anthony puts it very clearly, research and teaching are not a zero-sum game. If we can link research and teaching, you actually get better value for money for your teaching than you would if we didn't have the research. It's not because if we didn't have the research, we'd have half the number of staff, we'd get more staff, more expertise around, and linking the research expertise into projects and things, the types of teaching, is what we try to do. And that is actually something this university can do, which many can't. And so having research actually adds to the value of teaching rather than subtracts. I don't elaborate that on if anyone would like to, but...
Could I just make one point before we finish this point? Just to say that I agree with you, but at the same time, a strong researcher never makes an excellent teacher. I think we all know that. We've all been through the education system, and actually not all of our primary or secondary teachers have come out with a PhD and a research degree, and actually excellence in teaching is very different to excellence in academic research.
I entirely agree, but I wouldn't agree with your point that a strong researcher doesn't make a good teacher. There are good teachers and bad teachers, there are good researchers and bad researchers. The two are not necessarily correlated, and in fact some of our best teachers are also the best researchers. And it's a question of making sure that everybody's delivering at the right level. But you shouldn't say good researchers are bad teachers. That's often not true at all.
Yeah, that's why more investment, as I mentioned before, actually needs to go into good quality teaching, not just to focus on research. Higher education's expanded over time. We've got loads of different types of students at university and different types of students which are on this campus as well. The example I'll give you is, say a young person, the way they learn now, a lot of young males, and there's research around this, the way they learn, for example, is they play computer games when they're younger. When you go on computer games, you try and complete the level, you fail, you try again, you fail, you try again, you get into the next level. So your brain is rewired to completely learn in a different way. So when that student then goes into lecture third term, they completely switch off and PowerPoint presentation comes on straight away. Now one of the things that we're working on now is the student voice embedded into defining what good teaching quality is, and we're actually working with Dunelm Union and an initiative called student-led teaching, where the students get to decide the criteria around what they feel, the way the lecture helped them and how they help them succeed in that lecture based on the different teaching styles and the different methods that helps that individual student and the different types of students that are now on campus. And more investment needs to go on focusing on
the quality and the excellence of that lecturer and the way they've taught those students. And it's not just about recognising that we need to get to this level, it's also recognising that lecturers or teachers,
researchers, but the lecturers as well, so there's more opportunities for them to succeed.
Fantastic. I'll go to Anthony, of course, please.
I think what worries me is any sense that you're either excellent at research or you're excellent at teaching. And I come back to a point that for at least 60 years, Durham has had a reputation for being excellent at teaching and excellent at research. We wouldn't be third in the league tables if we weren't excellent at teaching and excellent in research. And I think that's a really important point, and every bit of work we've been doing in the university over the last 3 or 4 years has really been trying to think through the implications of how we make very clear that the quality, the excellent quality of the research directly and materially impacts on the quality of the teaching and ultimately the quality of the degree that our undergraduates get and their employability. And it might well be that other parts of the sector have to set up a sort of two tribes mentality. And I can understand why they might do that. I don't need to speculate here why they might do that. But at Durham, we've actually got a level of excellence in both teaching and research that means we don't actually have to do that. And we now have the highest proportion of fellows of the Higher Education Academy. That means every new lecturer who comes into the university has to get a license to teach. And Durham has the highest proportion of any research-intensive university in the United Kingdom because we make it a requirement for all of our probationer staff. And we think that's important because we do recognise that our staff, when they come to the university, especially new staff, need to understand not just how to teach, how to stand up in front of a class and convey knowledge, but also how to design modules, how to design curricula, how to create forms of assessment and then mark them appropriately. So I think it's really important, and I would hope that Durham can remain very focused on the idea of making sure that research and teaching do not end up being a zero-sum game. And we've invested a lot of time and effort in really avoiding some of the two tribes wars that are going on in other universities that will ultimately be to the detriment of the quality of the student education.
Thank you very much. Are there any comments on the floor at this stage? It's worth saying if you feel something is specifically relevant to the conversation at the moment, then just sign your hand in the air, we'll come to you. Before we move on, then very quickly, if we could go to the Vice-Chancellor.
Just to add to what Anthony said, first of all, we shouldn't forget that we have a substantial number of students in this university who are research students. They need researchers to teach them. PhD, research masters, etc., etc. That's often forgotten. And we wouldn't have them if we didn't have the researchers there who are world leaders in their subject. And actually, most undergraduate students in their final year have research projects of one sort or another, which are a really important part of the education here for the best and brightest students, which we tend to get at Durham, which just doesn't equip them just for research, but equips them for how to ask questions, how to answer questions, which is critical for whatever they do in their future lives. And again, that requires having people tackling research at the frontiers of knowledge. You know, how many students go out to Greenland to measure the ice caps? How many go out to look at earthquakes and landslides in Nepal, etc.? That's all part of our undergraduate curriculum, which only comes because of the excellence in research. Just two other things, though, on the teaching quality. We have teaching in all our promotions. It's not just research. Many universities only look at research for promotion. We don't. And we not only look at the teaching quality, but we also look at the scores from the feedback of students. Just going back to Usman's point, those are all looked at for promotions. And secondly, all the feedback is taken into account, and we have Liz Bird, going back to your point about modern technologies, who is leading probably the country actually in developing new technologies and new ways of e-teaching and technology-enhanced learning. And she's leading the country in developing those things here in Durham.
Thank you. In that case, we will go to a question from Matt, from the College of St Hilda's Bede.
As I understand it, universities have lost the majority of their government funding a year before the increased revenues from the new fees. Why is it the university is holding such large reserves that this loss has not had any discernible effect? And why are more of these reserves not being invested in the university students and its estate?
Chris again.
That question's a bit like, when did you stop kicking your wife? It makes some assumptions which simply aren't true. Yes, it is absolutely true that the government funding has been cut before fees go up. So we, like every university, have had a drop in our income. In fact, it's not much of a drop because of the fact that over the last few years we have saved up some money so that because we predicted this was going to be coming, and so we could cover that. So actually, our expenditure this year has not gone down as it has in most universities because we were developing a surplus last year. That's meant that we haven't had to do what many universities have had to do, which is close departments, lose staff, etc., etc. We've smoothed that out over a period, precisely because we predicted this coming and we saved the money for it. Universities don't make profits, as some people seem to think. We're charities. All the money we get goes back into research and education by law. It can't do anything else. And yes, we do make an operational surplus, but every organisation has to make an operational surplus so that it can invest in new infrastructure all the time. And we are currently investing in new infrastructure very substantially. We're nearly doubling the size of the library. We're refurbishing lots of student rooms. Yes, we'd love to do it faster, but we haven't got the money to do it faster. We're investing in a new student services centre. We've just invested in new sports facilities, etc. These things take time, but they're all happening, and they're happening because we make an operational surplus. But you have to plan these things over periods of years. We're now planning with Mike how we can help restore this building and make it much more, but you can't do that instantaneously. It's going to cost us many, many millions of pounds to do. We have to plan that. We have to get planning permission for all these things. It takes time to do. So you have to think of finances over a long, long period. But we don't store money for the sake of storing it at all. We store it so we've got money to save up, for example, to redo this building, to build a student services building, etc., and to get over the deficit that all universities had this year. And we did that very successfully. If you look at most universities, they've actually been losing staff, they've been losing departments in many cases as well, which hasn't been helpful.
Mike King.
Yeah, firstly, it is worth noting that the university does make millions and millions in surplus each year. And while it does invest lots of the profits back into the institution, I think the point that...
Sorry, I will interrupt. We do not make profits. There is no such thing as a profit in university. We're a charity.
It's spent again.
There is no profit.
It's spent again, but there is money that is made. It is reinvested. I think the point that Matt was making is that it's not that there are certain areas of the university which really are not in a world-class state, even in a standard-class state. I mean, in Hillbeat, for example, there are blocks which are category D. Now that means it's basically not fit for purpose, not fit for living. 30% of our college accommodation is ranked as category C or D, which is completely unacceptable. We have college blocks which are pretty much falling apart. We're spending money in certain areas of the university, but we're not spending it in some fundamental parts which need to be spent today, really. I mean, Christopher, as Matt is aware, Christopher Block is just simply unacceptable to send students to live there. And I'm not surprised that we score poorly in certain areas of the NSS based on poor living accommodation. On top of that, looking at accommodation, and we can't accommodate all of our students down in Queen's campus. We can only accommodate 50% of our first year students down in Queen's campus, which means that we have to put them in blocks which the university does not own. That's not an ideal situation at all. What that means is that they're not getting the same facilities that you expect when you come to Dunelm. When you come to Dunelm, you sign up to a college. You don't sign up to live in a block that's run privately and then get to walk across a busy road in order to get to your college environment. That's not what students are signing up for. And at the moment, we don't have the facilities that we need.
Chris.
Yeah, I have to come back on that because I think you miss a number of points. First of all, Durham University provides the highest proportion of accommodation of any university in the country for its students. Many universities have almost no accommodation. We have a very high proportion. That's the first thing. Yes, it's. Secondly, accommodation costs are very different from the fees. Accommodation costs are paid for by students through their college bills, etc., etc. That's very different from the fees, and so we shouldn't confuse the two. Of course, we have some accommodation which is not ideal, and Christopher Block is a very good example in Hill B, and we are making plans, but the question is priorities for spend. A few years ago, in fact 4 or 5 years ago when I arrived, the students told us the highest priorities were not student accommodation, they were library extension, they were student services building, etc., which is what we are doing. Next on the list is things like Dunelm House, and we're planning replacement. We are actually replacing a lot of college accommodation every year. About 5 million every year is spent. Next year it's going to be Hatfield, this year it's been Castle, the year before it's was Trevelyan, etc., Christopher Block is different. That is a block we inherited as part of a teacher training college. When we inherited teacher training college, built to 1960 specifications, which are not good. It is a terrible block, everyone knows that. If we knocked it down, we'd have even less accommodation. What we've got to be able to do is build some new accommodation first, which we're in the process of planning, so that then students can move into that, and then we can get rid of Christopher Block. The final thing I should say, 4 years ago, is that the colleges had enormous numbers of vacancies. There was a vast number of voids in the colleges, mainly because people felt they were not good value for money to return to. We've completely turned that around. Again, listen to the students. Now, more and more people want to live back in colleges. Now, we're in a position to be able to invest in more student rooms, and that is in the planning, which is what we're going to do. But we couldn't do it 4 years ago because students didn't want to live in college. We had to turn that round. We've turned it round. But it can't be done instantaneously. You're absolutely right. Christopher Block shouldn't be there. But what do? We've got to be able to replace it.
So, a point from...
and it will be replaced.
A point from Matt Woodham, please.
Chris, I feel that's a slight generalisation to make. I've been at these universities 5 years now, and as I understand it, the particular block in question, which is category D, which as I understand it is technically classed as uninhabitable, that is one way of describing category D, it's the lowest category there is. Sorry, can I finish? Has been like this since I got here, and there has been lots of discussion about this. During the past 5 years, the number of students returning and wanting to live in Hillmead has plummeted to basically zero in terms of the percentage of our student population. It may be the case that returners are wanting to come back in other colleges across the university, but this is then being squeezed by increased numbers of freshers, increased number of postgraduates, without an increased number of bed spaces. So any increase across this is being squashed from both sides.
Thank you.
No, I don't disagree with you. Christopher Block needs to be replaced. It's a question of priorities and what you can afford to do when. And 4 years ago, it was very clear, listening to the students, that the first priority was improved library facilities, improved lecture theatres, improved student services buildings, etc. And at that stage, across the colleges in general, there were lots of voids. People were not wanting a college accommodation because they considered college accommodation was too expensive compared to the accommodation in town. We've turned that around now, which is very good, and students want to live in college, and we've been refurbishing lots of colleges. Christopher does need to be replaced, but it requires a new build, it requires the land. We can't just knock it down, because then there will be no accommodation at all. It will be happening, I can assure you, but you can't just say, right, let's do it now. There's planning permission, we're all in conservation zone, etc. It takes some time, unfortunately, and we are working on that now, very high priority, but we weren't 5 years ago because the students told us there were other priorities, that's all. It will happen, but it's not a question of not having the money at this stage, it's a question of the planning and getting that into place, and it will be put into place. That's what we're doing at the moment.
Yes. Mr. Morris.
Yeah, okay. I'm a bit confused about this issue about increasing returner numbers. We have there's a fifth JCL president all shaking their heads at that point. We're only seeing declining returner numbers.
It may be at the moment, but I can tell you that 4 years ago, I mean, I don't know whether you have the figures, Anthony, 4 years ago, there were about £1 million worth of voids in the colleges. The colleges had many rooms completely unoccupied. And at that stage, why were we going to build more rooms when we had lots of unoccupied rooms? Now the food's been improved enormously, and that was another thing that students told us, improve the food. The food's been improved enormously. A lot of the colleges have been refurbished, and they're much better. Look at Grey, Trevelyan, etc. You're right, Hillmead hasn't reached the list yet, but that's going on. And now people are going back into those colleges. If you look at Grey, is someone from Grey here? Yeah. I mean, I've heard there are people who wanted to return to college that there's no space for now.
Would you care to comment, Josh?
I think it's the community aspect of college life that we want to attend.
Of course, yeah.
In that case, question from Charlotte. Yes, sorry, Charlotte Bradley, coming. Oh, sorry, that's my fault. Sorry. Question from Charlotte, who's the Collingwood president. Could you possibly describe what your idea of a balanced community is, and how you think this will benefit a collegiate structure where each college celebrates unique and individual traits? Okay, and I'm going to send that to Scott Parker.
I'm currently sat on a task and finish group that's looking at this, chaired by the Deputy Warden. And I think it's fair to say that currently we've, within that group, not reached a decision ourselves yet, because it is a very complex issue. What I would say is that we need balance in terms of things like gender, we need balance in terms of academic discipline, we need balance in terms of socio-economic background. All these things are so important. But I think what we need to look at more than this idea of balance is how we physically balance this college. So my biggest gripe at the moment is I met with a group of Chinese students. And one of the Chinese students said to me, I'm really angry, and I said, why are you angry? She said, well, I've come to do a master's programme, and I've been put in a ghetto, she said, in St Mary's College, I think it was, where all of the Chinese students are all on one corridor. She said, I've come to meet students and get an English perspective and get a UK education, the UK experience. And this, for me, is the bigger issue, rather than looking at the balance in terms of these other things, but how we physically balance the college community and make sure that every single student has the best experience that they can in Durham. There was a really sad story over this committee where Liz Burton, who talked about it, said that she'd met an international student who, on graduation, said to Liz, I've not met anyone here that I can still call, that I can go back home and they will still be somebody that I see as a friend. And I think that's so important, that we need to provide this idea of community for absolutely everybody. And it's not so much looking at these other things, it's looking at how we physically balance the college.
Before we move on, I'd like to, on this idea of sort of internationalisation and balanced college community, come to Ms. Malley. If you were making eyes at me there. Is it working?
I was just giving you a wink.
Yeah, I was just giving you a wink. Just to point out as well, just on the previous question, I didn't get to say some stuff, but first and foremost, I don't think in any circumstance we can use an analogy that kicking your wife is a joke in any way, and it shouldn't be used in any analogy in any case. On top of that, in terms of university reserves and being reinvested, it actually would make sense if you did have reserves to actually invest in some hot water for some students as well. And on top of that, in terms of the internationalisation, to me this is hugely important, not just for international students, for home students as well. You learn so much from different cultures and different people. By me going to university, I made friends who are possibly going to be the future Prime Minister of Bangladesh, politicians, future politicians in India. And one of my closest friends, in terms of cultures and learning from him, is basically he designed all my campaign materials from my student union all the way to NUS. I used to get advice from his dad by becoming friends with them, and now his dad's the Vice President of Libya. And it's really quite impressive in terms of the people that you actually meet on campus and what you learn from each other. I understand in terms of the circumstances a lot of people that the people in the revolutions are going through, because a lot of them were on my campus. They were immigrants into Manchester, and me learning about their families and what they went through by becoming friends with them was absolutely extraordinary, the different cultures. And one of the things I think institutions, I'm not just attacking Durham here in any way, but I think institutions generally need to get better at is actually understanding the cultures as well. So we all understand that a student from China or a student from India, the way you learn in those countries, out of respect, you copy people older than you. So a lot of them come here, then out of respect copy what they've been told, and then very innocently get caught plagiarising. And this has been an issue for years upon years, but institutions can't get it right for some reason. And I don't understand why, because it's been happening for years. And those students say, a student from China, you can only have one child. So their family have invested the whole of their money in that one child to come here to succeed, and then they get innocently caught plagiarising. And I remember this happening to a student from India, and he could not even tell his family because they brought shame on the family back in the communities back in India, and he couldn't even tell the family. We're looking into alternatives for things for him to do, but institutions need to get better at building the cultures both ways and learning both ways, rather than letting those international students down and then choosing them as cash cows.
Andy Forster. Remember, if you have any comments at this point, just put your hand in the air. We'll come to Patrick.
I mean, I agree with a lot of what Scott was saying, but I mean, we do make a public commitment that the university creates balanced college communities. And I think it's not unreasonable, seeing as we make that public commitment, to ask our students and to ask our staff in colleges, what does that actually mean? I think, Scott, you're 2/3 of the way there. It is around making sure there is a balance in terms of gender, a balance in terms of disciplines, a balance in terms of socio-economic type. This is not about trying to create identical colleges. It's about making sure that on some of the most basic markers that we've actually got communities that are balanced and will enrich the environment that students live and work in. The bigger challenge for me, I mean, I accept that Scott says that we've got issues around integration and they're very serious, but I'm still myself wrestling with an issue that only 70% of our applicants put a named college down when they apply to the university. And my own view is that for a collegiate university, that is too low. And one of the ways in which we will increase the number of applicants who put a college down is actually by celebrating difference, as well as drawing out the similarities in colleges. And that's a big job of work, and I know that Graham Towell is thinking long and hard about that. But it just strikes me as not acceptable that only 70% of applicants feel able, having read the literature, having been to pre- and post-application open days, to actually put down a named college.
We're going to go to Patrick there, and then if it's appropriate afterwards, come to the VC.
A couple of things on that. Thank you. First of all, well, we've talked about balance a lot, and it's important, but I think an important part of getting this balance in a college is experience, and we need third years returners to live in. And while improving food and accommodation is all good, increasing the number of undergraduates coming at the same time as postgraduates limits the number of third years who live in college. And if you don't have that experience of showing how to get involved in the JCR, the things that essentially add that employability to our collective CVs, how are you going to maintain that? You know, every college has had their returners rooms brought down, apart from Castle. So I just...
It's also decreasing for that.
Oh, it's Castle as well? Oh, not quite. Well, then we're all decreasing. Fantastic. And then, so there's that half of the question, and then the other half is, you know, getting people to apply to a certain college. Obviously, at Van Milde and at every college that holds a residential post-application open day, we had, how many of our senior faculty students? We had a fantastic number, our highest ever this year, of people who attended residential post-application open day, then apply to our college or to another college and name a college rather than have an open application. But with third day week let, and lower numbers of that, how, and not being able to run necessarily these residential open days, how are you going to keep that balance or increase that number?
Well, let's plunge right in then. Vice-Chancellor.
The post-application open days is a red herring. We will be having post-application...
Residential?
Yes, residential ones. We will be having residential...
Let's have some discipline, please.
That is the process which Graham Towell is leading at the moment, having a lot of discussions with the student body as to how to deliver that. That's all. We don't have an answer yet. It's being worked through. No, I mean, it isn't worked through. We're implementing it, and there are a lot of discussions. Students have very rightly flagged up this is important, and we're working out exactly the right way to do it, and it will be done. So just hear me. Graham is committed to residential post-application open days, right? And he is now working out how that's going to be implemented through discussions with JCR presidents, etc. That will happen. On the balanced communities, which I think is the bigger, more important question, actually. It is the bigger, more important question. A balanced community means a diverse community. And it's critical we have a diverse community in all the colleges. Exactly how it's diverse is up to the colleges, but we need students, ultimately we need students from different years, we need undergraduates and postgraduates, we need students from different countries, because don't forget, a large part of your learning here is not the formal lectures, it's the informal learning you get from colleagues, and you probably learn as much from colleagues of different disciplines than you do from your lectures, and that's part of the Durham experience. you meet people. I certainly remember as a student sitting down with people from different countries who then got different jobs, as you rightly said. And so that is what a balanced community is getting that real mixture of people from different backgrounds, different cultures, different countries, and everyone learning, and everyone having an international experience, whether they come from Mongolia or here. And it's how we deliver that. And you're absolutely right, we need now more accommodation. We have focused on refurbishing our accommodation to bring it up to scratch. More and more students want to live in college, which they do in return. We have to build more accommodation, and that is being planned, but it can't be done overnight. But I entirely agree, we need more accommodation. The focus over the last few years has been repairing the accommodation that wasn't up to scratch. And I have to say, that was because 5-10 years ago, the universities simply didn't have the income to do it.
If you excuse me for interrupting, before we go back onto the accommodation issue, we've got a question from Sally at the back.
Without meaning to hark on about 38-week lets, is imposing 38-week lets on the student population without actually having a clear solution to some of the key issues that students are concerned about, couldn't that be seen as quite short-sighted in antagonising a situation that potentially could have been clarified before it was brought to the student body?
Maybe Anthony wants to answer this, but I think it's the point is we have concluded as a university that we need to look at the community in each college across the entire year, not just in undergraduate terms. That's the key. And then it's a question of how we do that. And it's the implementation that's being worked through. We already have 38-week lets in most colleges. Ustenhof has 48-week lets. There's a variety anyway. The implementation of how we get these communities is what is being worked through. So I don't have answers to you, because you can't have answers until you've worked through the problem. And the problems are now being worked through between Graham and the students. So that's where we are. But the commitment we've made as a university is to make sure, and it's particularly because the increasing number of undergraduates who want to stay up, particularly international students, and the increasing number of postgraduates, nearly 50% of our students already have 38-week lets or longer.
Let's hear from the floor, from Charlotte.
Are you not slightly concerned and worried that problems are still being ironed through and still being discussed when these 38-week lets are meant to be implemented in 10 months, when problems it's still not sort of sorted and the ideas haven't been cemented in the university's head or the students' sort of minds?
No, because there's still time to do it, and B, Graham is doing what I think everyone wants, is having discussions with students to identify what all the issues are, to come up with a solution, and that's the important thing.
Let's hear from...
But I mean, we know what the main issues are. The main issues are post-application open days, and we need to make sure we can run those in the colleges that want to do those residentially. That's fine. Not all colleges do. Some at the moment don't do it, and they might want to do it, and we have to work that through. The second issue is around Van Mildert in particular, CNU, which is the supported progression and things like that. That's very important for the university.
Vice-Chancellor, before we move on to that, I think let's perhaps hear from Mike King, who's itching to talk, I believe.
I find it highly concerning that we don't have answers, but we do have policy, and we don't know how we're going to implement it. That's something that's, I'm not clear on. The time issue is an issue. Students that want to live in their third year do not have a price of how much it's going to cost them to live in their third year. This is massively affecting balanced college community. It's not going to be about balanced college community if we keep going down the way that we're going. We're going to have a first year community. We're going to have a halls of residence. JCR presidents are not happy, students are not happy, and they're making themselves very clear. As for the discussions with the Deputy Warden and the implementation, the discussion is now happening after everything's been decided. You know, there was no initial consultation on, or at least I certainly wasn't aware of it, on whether we should have 38-week lets. And because students would have told you, no, we don't want 38-week lets or compulsory. I mean, there's no choice. As for how they're going to be implemented, again, like Charlotte says, there's 10 months before they're going to be implemented. There's no welfare facilities that have been decided. There's no extra IT facilities being put on. We don't know how we're going to cater for these students that can't self-cater for themselves. We're making a decision which, like I keep saying, has already been made. It got made behind closed doors And it really is affecting our balanced college community. We're in great danger of ruining what is special about Dunelm, which is our colleges, because we haven't consulted students properly. This is a perfect example of how this relationship, this partnership between students and the university does not exist as it should do at the moment. And we've got some serious concerns that we need to deal with. It's all too late on this third-year elect one. We managed to shoot ourselves in the foot. I genuinely think that the university is going to live to regret this. And I think that we need to learn from this. We need to make sure that this relationship between students and the university really does become something that is important. Because at the moment the relationship is not there.
Right, let's hear from the floor. Let's hear from Amy on the front left. And then we'll go for a response to Anthony also, if it's appropriate.
Hello. I often feel that there's a divide between the sort of ideal of the college that the university propagate, especially to potential students, and the actual running of it, which is often done on a collegiate level. We have to balance the needs of the university with our own cultural and traditional methods. And we ask for differences in college. I know Professor Forster once named colleges, but we try our hardest to create a culture in each college, but centrally imposed ideals, such as, but not including mandatory 30 lets, making it impossible to truly represent our own collegiate communities.
Professor Forster.
Well, I think I recognise the strength of feeling from the student community, and we are in the position that we're in, which is we're very clear about the fact that 38 weeks will become the standard let, and we're very clear about what the issues are, and I think Mike and others have flagged those up. I mean, it is around catering, welfare. We haven't mentioned price, but I think price is a pretty important issue that's in the mix, and also issues around buyback to allow supported progression and post-application open days. And all we can keep doing, and the Vice-Chancellor's done it, I can do it, is say we're taking these issues very seriously and we're working hard to find a solution. I did just whisper to Mike when he said that this is the partnership is not working between the students and the university. I did mention, in my view, it may not be working on the 38-week let issue from the strength of feeling that we're hearing this evening. But in general, I think the partnership between the Students' Union, our students, our colleges and the university is very strong. And I would just want to make sure, as best we can, that the 38-week let issue, as important as it is, doesn't actually just knock us off course in being really very strongly committed to partnership working. And the final point I'd make is that the students were consulted on this. And I do appreciate Mike might not have been, and the current sabbaticals might not have been, but prior to the decision to move to 38 weeks as standard lets, the student community was consulted. And I know it might not have been you individually, and it might not be the layer of JCR presidents that are now currently in post. But last year, the students were consulted about this, and indeed, it was a particular bone of contention.
Let's go to Patrick.
I was a student here last year, and I wasn't consulted. I'm a very involved, student at this university. So I'd just like to know who, was consulted. Who did you ask, and what did they say?
So let's go back to Anthony for that, and then we'll come to Mike for a bit of a rebuttal.
Well, I can't give you individual names. All I can tell you is that the deputy warden, current deputy warden, and the previous deputy warden consulted students on the issue of 38-week lets. And it may not have been you as individuals, but that is what the deputy wardens have told us.
So just a small point of information before we go on. Last year, the overwhelming feedback was again in opposition to 38-week lets, which is why it was deferred for a year and all of this kind of business. But other than bed boxes, nothing has really changed to allow you to implement this process, other than you can now properly implement buyback if it's going to work out.
Very quickly, Vice-Chancellor, and then we'll go to Mike.
I think people are getting worked up about this issue slightly unnecessarily, because, no, I'm serious, because in a sense people can't have it both ways. Either we have a consultation process and a discussion with the students to find out what works best, which will take some time and is ongoing, which is why we haven't got any answers, or we simply make a decision. Now, I fully accept, I think everyone fully accepts, we did a consultation around lets that people wanted, and actually overall, people wanted longer lets. That is true, that was the majority. And that was done about 2 years ago. We then recognised when we were beginning to implement this that the mistake was made in the sense that there were all sorts of obstacles, such as the ones you've just been discussing about post-application open days. So we're now going into a consultation mode to try and iron out those policies, and we need to do that, and that will take some time to iron out how we can make sure residential post-application open days can obtain, etc. So and many colleges, don't forget, already have 38-week lets. So it's not that issue that's important, it's the issue of how do we make it work for all the things we want to do. Scott Parker.
I just want to clarify the consultation process that happened. What happened, it was Sam Rosebery, when he was a JCR president, president of Van Mildert College, so 2 years ago, sat on a working group where he openly admitted that he said, 38-week lets could be a good idea. They could provide this bigger wealth of community. He then went back to President's Committee, who overwhelmingly said, no, this isn't correct. Now, written in minutes, and we requested minutes last year and asked for when this consultation happened. And the only approval that the university have had that students are happy with this was that one meeting where Sam said yes. John Ashworth went to President's Committee at the very beginning of last year. John was the previous Deputy Warden, and had a meeting with President's Committee, who overwhelmingly said no, this should not go ahead. There are too many kind of damaging, limiting factors on this. And Prescom have always held that opinion, with the exception of one person who said yes in one meeting, and that's the only meeting that's minuted with consultation.
Let's go to the floor very quickly, and then we'll come back to the Vice-Chancellor. Sorry, let's just get here from Maria in front.
Thank you. So I think it's very easy when you're picking your battles to pick your statistics as well. You're saying throwing numbers out, like 50% of students already have longer than 38 weeks. Are you talking about 50% of postgraduate students? Are you talking about the undergraduate students numbers here? I've been a student here I've been a member of the university here now for 5 years, and like my friend down the corner, I was never consulted about this issue. And I think you can easily say, well, Van Mildert, where they've got a large postgraduate community, Euston offer 40-week lets. Euston often need 40-week lets, because they've got longer degrees than us, but none of the undergrads have been consulted, other than Sam Roosevelt, who was a very good president, but obviously made a mistake there, because that's how this has gone through without anybody else being back from it.
Vice-Chancellor.
I was just saying it hasn't gone through, because you're absolutely right, Scott. The JCR presidents then said last year, hang on a minute, there are some serious problems. And that was recognised, which is why we haven't got any firm decisions in place on some of these issues, and they're still being discussed. But where we do have a policy that is in place, and this is a policy which, John Ashworth over a period discussed with a lot of students, that we want to make sure we have more balanced communities for a whole variety of reasons throughout the whole year, including vacations for postgraduates, so they have the right facilities in their colleges, because they don't always have those at the moment. That's absolutely true during vacations. Also for international students, but also, it may surprise you to hear, for many students that come from less well-off backgrounds who don't necessarily have somewhere to go back and work, for example, in their third year, etc. And so we need to make sure those facilities are available. They're not all available yet. That's absolutely right. We need to make sure they are available, and we do get those balanced communities throughout the year. And one thing we put in place already, listening to students, is Christmas dinner in Castle. Now you may think that's odd, but we have over 200 students want to go to that because they're here over the Christmas vacation. And we do need to make sure that students are here the whole year, get the facilities. It's not just an undergraduate term time university. And that's the point.
We're going to leave that there, I'm afraid. Sorry. I'm going to go a question which has come from Jennifer Swain from John Snow College, which historically the union movement has been based on activism and campaigning. Why has Durham Student Union seemed apathetic to this traditional model? I assume by that she means Durham Student Union as in the membership of the students. So, let's go to Mike King.
I think that the short answer to that is because as a student union we haven't sorted out our in-house problems. We had a lot of restructuring of governance last year. We had a new constitution. We've now become a charity, and we're really building on restructuring council and making ourselves an effective representative body. We're certainly nowhere near perfect. We're certainly nowhere near a world-class students' union, and we certainly have not fixed all the problems that we have got. But that is something that we've placed as a priority as a sabbatical team this year, to make sure that we are communicating with students in the most effective way that we can, that we are communicating with President's Committee, with MCR presidents, with Joint Com, but not just that, because that's the things that everyone always just falls back on. What we really need to be doing is going out and talking to students. So for the first time, since I can ever remember. The whole sabbatical team went out this afternoon, we just went and spoke to students for hours. We asked them questions, and we were getting to the heart of what student problems were. Like I said, there were some in-house problems within the Students' Union. I do feel like we're turning a corner. I feel that we are able to represent students better now than we ever have done, and in 6 months' time, I do believe that we will be even better.
Usman, do you have any comments on this?
In terms of activism, one thing I will say in terms of being Vice President of Higher Education for 2 years and in a part-time position within NUS, and activism in terms of Durham, especially within NUS, has been increasing over the past couple of years, slowly but steadily. And one thing we have to do as well is actually define activism, because it can be taking place in so many different ways. There's activism is in terms of going to the national demo last year, which Durham sent 300 students, a few hundred, and people could say that's not that many, but it's a lot more than other student unions put forward as well. And in terms of activism, it can take place in very little form. So say program reps and course reps, making small changes on their course are the ones that have the biggest impacts. So we talked about the Chinese student before, but by the program rep or the course rep welcoming them on the course and leading them in the right direction, that helping them for plagiarism, made sure that they didn't get chucked off the course, or the student who thought about dropping out of university because they didn't fit in, that program rep helped them. Is that small change by welcoming them onto campus, making them feel part of the community, which has had that big change. But obviously building on top of that, and the whole, Mike talked about going out and talking. To me, that's going back to basics. That's very, very important. I personally think that student unions should have budgets to buy coffee, go out into campus, buy coffee, sit down with students and actually speak to them. Don't talk about the student union to start off with. Talk about the cricket game or the football game from last night, or wherever the interests will be, and build that relationship with students. Because once you've got the relationship, you have the trust, and I guarantee once you have the trust, they will come back and then get involved a lot more.
There's a question from the front there.
Yeah, actually, that was quite interesting what you raised there. It just made me think about it a bit more differently. Kind of people have said, oh, Durham, yeah, we're all very apathetic and whatnot, and yes, like the most I can think of in terms of activism was perhaps the demo last year, or some stupid debate about Israeli bananas or something about 3 years ago. But actually, in Durham, perhaps we are quite active. The amount of, like Scott was saying today, how our union council is one of the biggest in the land because so many people want to have their say, or just the JCL system, the amount of people who will get organised in either through DSU or just in organising a social event or a journalistic event, and then go on to become JCL presidents or whatever, and all this kind of excessive web of networks we have of what we call kind of student consultation, which isn't standing out in the street with a big banner, but it's student activism in a very different form, isn't it? That perhaps is quite unique to Durham, but perhaps we don't necessarily have to accept this point that we are all really apathetic.
I would absolutely agree with what you said. The student union had to reform itself as a charity about 3 or 4 years ago, and it was at a very low ebb for a variety of reasons there, and successive presidents have really geared up the student union and also begun to get to grips with what should make Durham have the best student union in the country, doesn't quite at the moment, which is the JCRs as well as the DSU. And how do we really join up the JCRs and the colleges with the student union, which is a unique issue to Durham, and should, if we get it right, and we're close to getting it right, we're getting much better at that, make it a really good student union. I think, if you want my personal opinion, I don't think we've now gone quite far enough on the education side, if you see what I mean. The JCRs are very heavily involved, which is great in the DSU, but to some extent the course reps and things on the education side are more diluted. But that's a more small issue. I think the student union's gone a long way. And I think it really has been a very active student union. But activity isn't necessarily going out on the streets with demonstrations, because that is thinking what can you achieve and what do you want to achieve. And it's really having the right discussions, the partnerships, and working with the university as appropriate, but also other bodies. And I'll just give one example, and that was the fight that the Durham Student Unions had, which I was extremely proud of, with NUS 2 years ago. The student union stood up for its rights, and whatever you believe about the British National Party, the students stood up for its rights and protested and actually got some change and got the student NUS leaders to come up and made a big difference. And I think it did it in a very, very effective way. not by mass protests on the street, but by working behind the scenes, putting motions up at NUS, withdrawing from NUS, etc. And so I think it is actually a very, very effective union and becoming more and more so. And just one other example is the work that Sam started and Mike is continuing, which is now working with us to improve this facility. Because to some extent, the university, because DSU was completely sidelined from the university, this building has gradually got become less and less of a student centre, which it should be. And of course, students are focused on their JCR.
Sorry to interrupt for a second, but I'm just very aware of time, and I don't want to cause confusion between the student union and Dunelm House. But can we go to husband?
But it's the work they've done to improve this building, which we're now getting on with, which is very important.
Yeah, just adding to what you said, activism comes in so many different ways, and the fact that you had 3 referendums is a good form of activism, which actually took place, and I know because I was here for all 3 of them. And it was good to see in terms of engaging with students and speaking to them all and getting them involved in the campaigns, but just having those conversations with students is activism in a different format. And our Vice President Union Development, Ed Marsh, who works with building on governance within student unions across the country, he actually said that Durham Student Union actually has the best model and potential for representation within the future. So it's about building on top of this and actually making that happen. And if that comes into place in terms of the changes that could take place in a lot quicker, will be great for the students that you have here. And one of the things that I always joke around when students say that they're apolitical, that's a political statement that they've just made.
Scott Parker.
Just on this one, like Mike said, we had a rocky history. Thanks really go to Natalie Crisp and Sam Dale for really bringing us up and bringing us to where we are now onto this level playing field to start building and building again. But it is worth saying that in this year we've appointed an academic representation coordinator who is looking after all the education side. So on the note of education, we're making big strides, and I think it's unfair to say that we're not continuing to strive on for that. And also, who can say that a student union that 3 weeks ago in council put a motion to have a student mass walkout isn't a student union that has activism at its core? I would say that proved really that we are active, that we are a political body, and should communications break down over 38-week lets, I won't go back to that, but there's a student walkout that will happen there.
Fantastic. Let's go to another question from the floor. Dan Boddington from St Cuthbert's Society.
Yeah, my first question is to the panel. How highly do you rate and prioritise welfare?
That was how highly do you rate and prioritise student welfare? And we'll go to Scott again.
As this is my area, I'd just like to say so highly as a student union, we really regard student welfare very, very highly. I would say we have one of the best welfare systems in the country. This shows that we've got the second lowest dropout rate for the whole country, and we've got a network of many, many welfare officers working throughout colleges. I've been to other student unions this year where literally they've got one welfare sabbatical who looks after 25,000 students. Here we've got a team of X amount of 100 people who are working in welfare. So for me, it's hugely important, and I thank all of those people who do great jobs day in, day out.
I'd like to point out there is a specific number of an X amount of 100 people, but there are many of them. Professor Forster, do you have any comments?
Well, I just want to echo that, and I would say that we've, in adding some more budget to DSU in the education area, what we've done actually is also invest in the welfare side, and clearly colleges and senior tutors play an important role in welfare, but I think so do our students, and actually what other universities look at Durham and see that is so special is the way in which our students look after students. And that goes back, of course, to balanced college communities and having returners in colleges and the distinction between a college and a hall of residence. But I think it is important to flag that up, the role our students play in welfare support. And obviously with Scott, we're interested from the university perspective in working out how we continue to support and nurture that. And we see that as being something very special for the university.
And my second question was, so I've gone 40 of my friends for the best part of the last 7 weeks have had no heating, hot water, gas, laundry, had little food in college. How are we supposed to build a community with that and try to survive those 7 weeks?
Chris Higgins.
Yes, I mean that is one of those disasters that no one predicted and no one wanted to happen, and it is a a significant issue. I think you're referring to cuts. Yes. The problem we've had is one of the boilers broke down, and because of asbestos in the boiler room, it's been taken longer to fix than one would hope, because you can't send people in to fix it unless you clean it, and that is a real problem. You would have to admit that the student body, the senior tutors and everybody have done everything possible to make life easier. No?
Let's say something specific.
Can I just say this is an issue then for your college principal, who should be raising it with... We have acting principal, but yes.
Let's see, the gentleman on the left.
Okay, so why then have our students only been offered £61 as compensation, which is as a goodwill gesture, not even as any form of compensation, and then why has there been a complete lack of communication and also miscommunication on the part of the college and the university?
I honestly can't tell you because, as I say, that should be a college issue, but I will take it up when I go away and find out what's going on. I would say that's not actually a real welfare issue, the ones we were talking about, but it is an important issue, I entirely agree. Going back to the welfare question, I think overall, the student union has, one of the things it's really done is focused its welfare and its activities on welfare and education, which has been a big benefit, and you'll see immense strides. It's one of the improvements. But I'll take that up with the colleges, but I can't answer that question because I'm not directly involved, and it's clearly a hiccup in the colleges. And I know it's been fixed. Sorry, no, it is a hiccup. It's a hiccup because, yes, I know, but there is a serious problem that we can't send people in because it's an old building and because of the asbestos there. We can't send people in because of health hazard until that's clean. That is the problem, which is why it's not sorted out. Now, what I do, that we can't do anything about. What we can do something about is make sure that you're looked after appropriately in the interim. Breakdowns happen, I'm afraid, accidents happen, and that does happen. But we can look at that, and I will take that up, but I can't answer the question because I don't know the answer.
Let's hear back to the floor, and then we'll go to Elizabeth.
In relation to the asbestos issue, I'm now a member of the university staff here at Dunelm, running the bar at CUF, and I'd like to know what the panel can offer to safeguard my staff, myself, who's been going down into our asbestos-filled cellar, 2 cellars. In fact, so it's one cellar that we've had taken out at the beginning of the year, a second cellar after a month and a half into term, which had asbestos into it, the attic in my loft, in my personal bedroom, and I'd also like to ask what people are going to do about safeguarding against the health and safety of my staff for the last years, myself for the past 5 years, and the people who've been going down into the asbestos cellars this year.
Scott or Elizabeth, who would like to go first?
This is something that I've only known briefly about, and I think first of all, we need to get a really serious message from Professor Higgins that he's really going to take this away and look first of all how we can get a fast result. Not only a fast result, but a far bigger, not a goodwill gesture, but compensation. £61, I must say, is a kick in the teeth. If I hadn't had hot water heating in those old blocks down at Cuffs for 8 weeks, I would probably be seeking legal advice, I'm not going to lie. So I think this is something that I think Professor Higgins needs to take away and take extremely seriously, and look not only at how we can get a fast resolution, but also how we can get a far greater amount of compensation than £61, which I do think is a kick in the teeth.
Not just in the short term, I'm talking the long term. 20 years from now, people coming in with asbestos issues, I don't know.
Can I just clarify a few facts?
Are we going to be able to come back to the university and say, I want a record to say that yes, we accept there has been asbestos in here, these people have gone down there for the past 5, 20, 30 years, and that if something happens in the future, we need to safeguard against our lives and our families.
Yes, can I address the 2 issues? You're absolutely right. If you've not had hot water, etc., you should have taken that up with the college. If you have and haven't had a response, that's serious. No, that's serious, and I will take that away, and I will make sure you get a proper response to that one. That's the route to deal with that one, and if the colleges haven't dealt with it, then I need to take that up, so I will take that up. The asbestos issue, can I just be very clear? The issue is not necessarily a risk to health at all. It's a potential risk to health. We've got a number of boiler rooms that we need. This is not really relevant here. We've got a number of boiler rooms. We're not certain, because we haven't got the documentation to say they probably haven't got asbestos as a risk to health, but we have to, no, they probably haven't, but we have to get the inspections done before we can send people in as a precautionary measure. And we've now just geared up rapidly to get all those things solved as quickly as possible and check all those rooms, and it is now happening. It's one of the penalties of having lots and lots of old buildings, I'm afraid, and we've been gradually removing the asbestos as we've been refurbishing. Yours haven't been done, but we've now geared up and we're solving all that problem. But there is unlikely to be any health issue to anyone, but the rooms do need to be inspected before we allow people in them, and so it's a precautionary measure that we're locking down those rooms until they've been fully inspected.
I appreciate that, but I want, it is unlikely that there's nothing that will happen in the time, hopefully obviously nobody gets affected. Thank you very much. Nobody gets affected by the potential dangerous effects of the asbestos. However, I'm saying there's a potential to the people's health of being down there, and the potential damaging effect to the people's health, and you can't just fob us off with well, something might not happen in 20 years' time. We need some kind of backup from the university to ensure that in later years, if something has happened as a result of the asbestos...
I
entirely agree with you.
Can I say something really quickly?
If you don't have Chris Keating's finished, and then we'll go to the floor.
No, I entirely agree with you. And that, if you're a member of staff, right, that should be taken up through your line manager to health and safety.
Yeah, well, you and me both.
Okay. See me afterwards and let me know, because that's the right route, is through your line manager.
Can I say something really quickly? Should students therefore be worried that some fire doors have been replaced recently due to asbestos, but bedroom doors which weren't falling apart, but they weren't told why they were being replaced. They weren't told that it was due to asbestos. Actually, they're actively told not to. Estates and buildings were told that they weren't to tell students that it was due to asbestos. We heard through a good anonymous member of staff, so it's on good authority that you've heard this. So people changing the doors were told not to tell students it's due to asbestos. So should they be worrying now about their bedroom doors?
As far as I know, nobody should be worried, but we should look into that. If you haven't had a response from your line manager, which is the right route, then we need to find out who can give you an answer, because that's important. I don't know the answer. Why would I? Don't go around and inspect every door. I cannot believe that anyone has done anything to put anyone at risk, and I suspect it's rumour, but we need to find out the truth of it. I entirely agree. So I don't know who is. So it's a cost contingent, is it? That's when they. It's not appropriate. Let's go away and sort out detail. I don't know whether you're obviously a sort of spokesperson. You want to see me afterwards, and I'll find out the facts and put you in touch with the health and safety.
On the subject of student welfare, should we go to Usman?
Yeah, thank you. I think the asbestos stuff and the hot water scenario is quite shocking, because just from a basic right, you should have hot water at least to shower up, and that obviously has a knock-on effect in terms of going to university, your concentration in terms of on a lot of other issues as well. But for me, rather than debating the issue, the commitment's there now. We need to go and solve this as soon as possible and make sure it gets solved, because it's just not right. I'm with the asbestos as well, because it was actually, from a personal point of view, asbestos is what triggered off my asthma. I got asthma on the back of it when it was in one of my buildings back at my university. But in terms of the whole welfare issues, it's great to see that it's been focusing a lot more by the Students' Union. It's becoming a bigger priority within NUS as well, and that's coming from an education officer, that it needs to be, and it has become part of one of our priority campaigns within NUS called Pound in the Pocket campaign, where we're focusing on one of the biggest things which the white paper came out with, which is detrimental to students, was this whole concept of fee waivers over bursaries. And what the government has offered is a thing called a fee waiver. Now, you should put that into context. What that actually is imaginary money or monopoly money that you'll never ever see, and it does more to balance the government's balance books, basically, the treasury mishaps that they made, than it does to actually help students. Now, putting it into a practical example, say you pay £9,000 a year after university, that's £27,000 you'll pay over 3 years. If you get a fee waiver a year of £1,000 a month, that's £3,000, so 27 minus 3,000, you will pay back £24,000 once leaving university. Once you're earning, so it's not really going to have a big impact on you in terms of that minus £3,000. Now, if you put that context of you as a student in the form of a bursary, that's going to help you tremendously. That's going to help you, focus on your studies. That's going to help a single parent work around the 3 children. That's going to help a part-time student that doesn't have to work as many hours so they can focus on their studies. That's going to help students in so many ways and have so much benefit towards them. that the focus needs to be there. That's a welfare issue because it's going to have an impact on the lifestyle and your focus while you're a student as well. So it's great to see in terms of welfare issues, but even in terms of cultures as well, focusing on welfare issues. We talked about international students before. A lot of international students, out of respect, will not open up when it comes to issues because in their countries you're not allowed to do that. And that's why it's a bigger, it's really good that the student union and students themselves need to be playing the role in terms of building these relationships with international students, because the only way they're going to open up to the student union is by building that relationship and having that trust, and we need to make sure we're representing their voices, and that's a huge welfare issue as well.
I think time is pretty much run away with us, so I'm going to open it up to one more question. So if we can have hands up for, somewhere over here. The one lady behind Amy. Yes.
Hi, thank you very much. Could you read out my question that I gave to you at the start?
It depends what your name is.
Sophie Hicks.
Oh, right. Bear with me a second. Okay, Sophie Hicks from Van Milder, as opposed to all the other Sophie Hickses I have here. The whole thing?
Yes, please.
Right, I'm a representative of the Young Persons Project, a children's outreach scheme affiliated with Van Milder College. The project aims to encourage young people from all backgrounds to consider a future in further education. The results are clear, as this quotation from the participant shows, and I quote, "YPP has changed my ideas on university. Where tuition fees didn't make me look at going to university, YPP changed my opinion completely. YPP runs a 4-day residential at Van Milders in the Easter holidays. How do you propose to protect the residential?" So with our final question in mind, and we'll keep this as brief as we possibly can, please, may as well go to Professor Higgins.
You're absolutely right, it's a fabulous scheme and it will be protected.
How?
Well, I don't know yet because those discussions are going on between the students and Graham Towell, that's all. So we need to work out what needs to be done to protect it. So I don't have an answer, but it will be protected.
Are you able to give a guarantee?
Sorry?
Are you able to give a guarantee that it will be protected?
Yes. Graham Towell has said it will be protected, and we're talking to find out what the implications are and how we can make sure it's protected. I can't give you the answer because those discussions are going on, but it will be protected, as will post-application residential open days. Okay? I mean, I can't say it clearer than that.
Usman.
And having said that, it really is a fantastic scheme from all perspectives. It's a great scheme. It does what it delivers. It helps both our students and young people who want to aspire to university. It's a fabulous scheme, and there's absolutely no reason why anyone would want to stop it, frankly. It's a fabulous scheme, and we will be continuing it. I can absolutely guarantee you that. What I can't say is exactly what's going to happen and how, because those are ongoing discussions, but you've raised the point, or one of your colleagues did, and we need to get that right, I assure you.
Usman Ali.
Yeah, so I've been meaning to say this for a long part of the debate now, but 4 years ago it would have been protected. In terms of that seems to be the figure which keeps on coming up in terms of 4 years ago everything seemed to have happened. But in terms of the project itself and survival, it's absolutely amazing. My vision of widening access or widening participation, whatever you want to call it, is that over the next 5 years, it's students embedded in this type of work. I think student unions, and one of the things I'm focusing on this year, is student unions actually embedding in everything they're doing, and it's the right thing to do. You know, we need to be out there engaging with students from different backgrounds to let them know that they should be going to university and telling our personal stories as well. Aim Higher, which was the national organisation which was based in different cities which were connected with schools, which said to people from the most deprived areas, from the most deprived schools, from the most deprived communities, yes, you can go to university. If you really want to, you can become a business consultant, you can become a doctor. If you really, really want to, you can become the vice president of NUS. But the whole base of that being scrapped by the government is that this guidance, you've got the information, you've got the advice, but if you haven't got the guidance, the information and advice doesn't mean anything. You can't translate that information and, to the people from those communities. Personally, I'll give my details after this, but I hope this is one of the case studies I can take back to point to NUS onto our widening participation hub. But with the Aim Higher going, I potentially feel that students need to become the new legs of the Aim Higher on our own will, on our own merit. We need to go out there engaging. And the Aim Higher research actually shows that the one thing that students remember when they come onto campus wasn't the university, it was the connections that they made with students. It's the one interaction they had with that student. So I think that our football teams, for example, should be going out there playing with football with the local kids, and after those interactions start talking to them about going to university. Our cricket team should be doing the same. We should be out there engaging.
Because they meet with us regularly, they are your representatives, and we can then try and get you answers to those questions, which I would do.
Fantastic. Well, my mother used to say you should never go to bed angry, so on that note, I think we'll go down the line, and with a purely selfish reasons, and it's customary with the funny question at the end. I'd like to know what is either the most embarrassing, humiliating, whatever thing you've done for charity, or perhaps the thing you're most willing to do, bearing in mind there's a strong possibility I will hold you to this. So, safe knowledge that I know what he's doing, Scott Parker.
Well, some of you may look at me and think that I'm not the slimmest guy, the most athletic guy, or the most sporty guy. But about 2 weeks ago, I went to an opening of the new Centre for Sex, Gender and Sexualities in Durham that was hosted by Joe Phoenix. And afterwards, there was copious amounts of white wine. And I admit that I'd been at work and I hadn't really eaten that much, and I had a glass of wine and suddenly became a bit tipsy. And Archie bet me that I wouldn't be able to do tough guy.
Which I think is the safest £100 bet.
I said, yes, I will. So training's begun, the diet's begun, and I will do tough guy on the 29th of January.
Would anyone else like to chip in?
I'll chip in. The most embarrassing thing I've done for charity is actually refuse. Because Archie asked me last year if I would do bungee jumping on Palace Green. And much as I'd love to, I had declined because I suffer from serious vertigo and there's just no way I could have done it. So I have to say it was seriously embarrassing having declined, but I will do something semi-embarrassing that I can actually do for you sometime, I promise.
Fantastic. Let the record show. Would anyone else like to chip in? Michael?
I'll do any duck challenge, just pick one, and I'll do it.
I'd rather give you money, Archie, than actually do any challenge you set me.
Finish off?
Yeah, it's quite weird because I don't actually get that embarrassed even when everything's wrong. I've been known since I was younger to be a big prankster, so I've always done pranking and got caught and all that kind of stuff. So in terms of the charity, I mean, at my own student union, we went out to students and post. So what was quite embarrassing, it wasn't that embarrassing, but I actually went out and did the shopping for the person who was going to get coins and it ended up being myself. There was tuna, there was sweet corn, there was oxo, everything that I could find to put within it. But in terms of a charity, I've bungee jumped, I've been gunged. Today, in terms of, I was on a panel debate before I came here with Alan Milburn, who's in charge of social mobility for the government, and the chief executive.
I'm just speaking to thank you all for coming. I think this has been a very special thank you to the panellists for coming, especially Usman, who came all the way from London, I believe, which I believe is an awfully long way away. So thank you very much. It's been a really interesting evening. So give them a massive round of applause.
Can I pass around the applause for the chair as well?
I believe we'll be heading up to Kingsgate Bar for a drink. Obviously, panellists are extremely welcome to join us, and you guys don't need an invitation, you'll be there anyway. So thank you very much, guys, and good night.